Frank Burlison again with Inside the Game, Past, Present, and Future. Visiting again with Coach George Raveling, head of international basketball for Nike. And of course, Coach Raveling's unique in a lot of guardians of the game this day because he was involved in the game as a player in the 50s and a coach in the 60s through the 90s, actually. And it's interesting, Coach, a lot of things people take for granted today when they watch NBA games or college games, and they see that the game, if not totally dominated by African Americans, it's preponderance of African Americans in the NBA certainly, and certainly a large number of the best players and teams are African Americans on the college level. But there was not so long ago, and not so many decades ago, when the Jewish Americans were the dominant players in the NBA, and in fact. There was a period not so many decades ago in the 50s and early 60s where you didn't see a whole lot of African Americans.
No, I think let's go back. I went to Villanova 56 to 60. When I played at Villanova, the 4 years I was there, we never had more than 2 blacks on scholarships. Myself, and when I first got there, was a fellow named Kenny Harrison who played for Lou Conaseca at St. Anne's Academy in New York. And then when Kenny left, the other scholarship player was U.B. Brown, who had U.B. White, who had a great career at Villanova and is in the Big Five Hall of Fame. But and if you go back and you look at the All-American teams in the 50s and even up into the late 60s, you would see a small sprinkling of African American players, but predominantly white players in that. And so you're just starting to see the early evidence of an evolutionary change from a racial compact standpoint. And so then when I finished Villanova and I went on and out and started to on the staff at Villanova and recruiting, all the schools in the South were segregated. And so you didn't have the proliferation of super conferences like you had now. There was no Big East in those days. And so when you went into the South to recruit, the first advantage you had right away was that you didn't have to recruit against any predominantly white schools. And so for example, I hear about a really good player in Florida, and I call my friend Jack Howling, who was the Orange Bowl director, but also the editor of Basketball Times. And so he said to me, he said, George, I don't know about this kid, but there's a guy who knows every kid in Florida. And he says, you call this and ask for Bill Buckhalter. He's with the St. Pete Times. So I bring it up to Bill. I call him, and he says, no. He says, Coach, the best player in this state, white, black, or blue, is Howard Porter. I said, well, who's he? He said, he's at Booker High in Sarasota. He said he's 6'9", but he said, I've never seen a player like him. He's not a back-to-the-basket player. So I go down, I see Porter play, and I think, oh, my God, I've never seen a guy this big who could play facing a basket, shoot the ball like he can. So I asked the coach who's recruiting him. He says Bethune-Cookman, Tennessee State, Florida, A&M, they're all traditionally black schools because none of the white schools in the state or in the South could recruit him. And so we started to recruit him, and then it finally became quickly obvious to us that we should spend more time recruiting in the South because we have a competitive advantage. And so then we got Johnny Jones out there. A lot of people don't know this, but one summer I signed that summer with Porter. I signed Howard Porter, Artis Gilmore out of Carver Dothan, and Hal Booker out of Darby Colvin in Pennsylvania. So now I got Porter at 6'9", committed to Villanova. I got Artis Gilmore at 7'1", committed to Villanova, and I got Booker 6'10", committed to Villanova. So now I got three players, one of which is in the Hall of Fame. One was MVP of the Final Four. Another one was a Division II Player of the Year at Cheney State. So in those days, to show you how different it was, I brought him up to Philly, put him in Brown Prep because you had to pass the SATs in those days, and then got him a summer job, and I put him on a summer league team out at Narberth, right outside of Philadelphia, in the summer league, and I coached the team. So that you can just show how different. So now I got 6'9", 7'1", 6'10" as my back line. We're killing everybody. So you fast forward through the summer, and we're envisioning a national championship. Unfortunately, Artis missed it by 2 points, and Booker didn't make it, and Porter did. So we ended up getting Howard Porter enrolled as a freshman, and we sent Artis Gilmore off to junior college. But the other thing in those days, Frank, was when you went into the black high schools were not allowed to participate in state championships and that. And so people don't know this, but as a result that no black schools could participate in the state tournaments, they had a tournament in Nashville that was called the National Negro Championship. It started out in Montgomery, Alabama, and then subsequently it moved to Nashville. And so what they would do, they bring in the best Negro high schools from all over the country, and they would play in a tournament. And whoever won the tournament was declared the National Negro High School Champions. And that was the only recognition that the schools could get. And in those days, in most, you didn't have a large cluster of high schools. So, say, for example, in Birmingham, there might have only been 4 to 5 high schools. So you can imagine the talent that was on those that were on those teams in that. And so subsequently, as they started to allow black schools to participate, or Negro high schools to participate in state championship, the first year in Indiana that they allowed the integration of the tournament, Crispus Attucks from Indianapolis, Indiana, won the state championship, and the star player was Oscar Robertson. So, and even for years and years, Frank, the Philadelphia high schools, for example, they never participated in the state championships, public schools or Catholic schools. So, and when you would go into the southern towns to recruit, it was very hard to find accommodations to stay overnight because of the segregation and that. And one of the things I was always fond of telling is when you get into the town, you'd ask for directions, and someone would say, they'd start to give you the directions, and they'd say, and when you get across the tracks, you'll be just about that. And across the tracks amongst black people meant when you got across the tracks, on the other side of the tracks is where black folks live.
Yeah.
In that, and so it was a totally different environment. But we were able to basically build Villanova's program when Jack Kraft was there off of Southern black players.
What do you think? Which factors? And I'm sure a little bit of each of them. But when you think back of your success and maybe some other success that some programs had, and tapping into that previously untapped pool of talent, what roles would you say did the civil rights movement, the integration of public schools, forced integration in a lot of cases, public schools ultimately had on changing the landscape to what it's become today?
I think that one thing that it did, it eased the pressure for the integration of players as it related to basketball teams at the high school level. And then we all remember or at least I think we do, the Alabama USC football game when USC just beat Alabama and out-talented them, and of course most of the defensive backs and runners for USC were African American and highly skilled. And the story goes that Bear Bryant said, "Hey, I got to get me some boys like that." And so, of course, they started to recruit blacks, and of course, then you go back to the Texas Western Kentucky game.
That was the 1966 championship.
Yes, and the fact that Texas Western started 5 blacks, and of course they beat UConn. I remember very vividly that Adolph Rupp coming up to speak at a Maxwell Club dinner in Philadelphia, and they wrote a column in the Philadelphia Daily News about Adolph Rupp, and the question was asked to Adolph Rupp, how come you've never had a Negro player on your team? And I'll never forget this to the day I die. Adolph Rupp's reply was, I never seen a Negro player that I thought was good enough to play for us.
Wow.
And so that was, how deeply rooted the feelings were. And it took a long time for some people to come around and to realize that it was time to rid themselves of the past. It was time to do right.
Do you think, in hindsight, and again, there's been a movie about it, there's been books about it, numerous articles written about that '66 championship game. But Coach, as a person, and I'm not sure if you were there or not at the game.
I was.
Yeah. Can people today realize the significance of Coach Haskins starting an all-black, all-African American starting line? How radical or how revolutionary or how eye-opening was that at the time?
Well, I think that one, if you talk to Coach Haskins, his answer would be, I just put the 5 best players out there that I have. I really didn't have anything to do with racial justice or civil rights. It was a byproduct of it. But even the year before, Loyola Chicago played. They actually had 4 in their starting line. Didn't start them, but when the heat was on, they were playing 4 players of color, and so this was the early evidence that there was a cultural change that was about to take place. And if you're in the state of Florida or Alabama and Mississippi, you don't want to see homegrown talent exported to the east, to Villanova, or in football to East Lansing when Duffy Daugherty was there. Duffy Daugherty had some of his very best, Webster. So the 2 prime examples in football that benefited from the segregation was Michigan State in football, Villanova and basketball. But those things were going to change. People were going to not allow their homegrown talent to continue to be exported to the Midwest and the East.
Coach, and obviously we talked about the Texas Western movement and stuff like that. But is there any literature out there or historical artifacts or books that you've read where you felt that if someone is really interested in finding out more about how the game was back then, that they could probably try to find or read?
Yeah, there are books out. I can't think of one off the top of my head, unfortunately. But if someone were to drop me an email, I can give them information on it. And there's a book out, and I should know the name of it, and I don't. But it was written by a sports writer in North Carolina, and it basically, he went back and researched who was the first black basketball player at every Southeast Conference school. Yeah. And then when he found that out, he went and interviewed each one of them, and only one of them was not alive. One of them had committed suicide, a kid who'd gone to Auburn, whose name escapes me right now. So he went back and he interviewed each one about their integrating to school. Now, I remember the one at Vanderbilt, the first SEC player was Perry Wallace, who went to Vanderbilt. And he went to high school right there in Nashville at Pearl High School. At the time, Pearl High School was all black. It's now called Pearl Cohen High School. But at the time when Percy went there, it was Pearl High School. And he was the first player to integrate the SEC. And so I will make it a task for me to get the name of the book, and we will put it up on the website in the next week.
One quick thing on this topic before we going to do to this topic for a bit. We talked about mentors, and obviously in your role as a former coach and the college and high school players you come into contact with, a lot of both international too, but with Nike. But do you sense that the players today, not just African Americans, but of all colors, realizes that how different the game was and how the game socially and not just the game itself, but socially how the game has changed so much in a few decades?
I don't really. The one thing that concerns me with most young players today is that they don't have a historic reference of the game. They don't really look back and try to understand how we got from the past to the present and how we're going to get to the future. And they have no idea the grave sacrifices that were made by people so that they can enjoy the things that they enjoy today. In some ways, things haven't changed. For example, when I went to Villanova on scholarship, you got $15 a month. We used to call it laundry money. Yeah. Today, there's this heated debate about should we pay athletes. Well, it's nothing novel. The administrators don't want to admit the truth. The number one reason in my mind that they don't want to pay the athlete is because of Title IX, because they have to pay the women too, and then it becomes very expensive. But the idea of compensating athletes with a stipend and the true cost of a scholarship is nothing novel. And 56, when I went to Villanova, that was part of my scholarship. You got room, board, books, tuition, and you got a stipend. The difference then, Frank, when I went to Villanova in 1956, when you enrolled there, they thought you came to get an education, not to play basketball. Basketball was just a conduit to get you through. I'll never forget this, Frank. I call home and I tell my mom and my grandma that I'm getting a scholarship to go to Villanova to play basketball. And so my grandmother says, "Explain that to me again, son." So I explained it to her. And she says, "You know what? I used to think you had a little bit of sense, but you don't have any sense at all, boy. You're just stupid. You think them people going to pay you to come up there and play basketball?" And she couldn't. It took her 2 years. I was at Villanova 2 years before she figured out it was legit, because she couldn't comprehend that anybody in their right mind would pay your education to go to school to play basketball. And then when you got there, we didn't have any tutors. There was no study hall. You either did the work or they sent you home. Yeah. And today, you got study halls, you got tutors, you got people selecting your class, you got all summer school, all these. A kid today who doesn't graduate has nobody to blame but himself. You got every possible resource that you could imagine to help you graduate. You almost gotta not want to graduate. Yeah.
Well, Coach, that sounds like another topic for an entire discussion. But for now, let's call it. Let's go on, and we'll visit some other topics later. But for now, for basketball, the game, past, present, and future, with Coach George Raveling, I'm Frank Burlison.